Hi, Dr. J here from Work Time. We have reached that time in our training cycle where we like to give a little bit of information and help people understand a little bit more about what they're doing and why they're doing it. Today, we're going to take into consideration why we go to the gym, what's actually happening in the body when we go to the gym, and how do we continually progress that when we're working out in the gym to reach our goals. Now, we all start with a goal of something that brings us to the gym. Maybe it's a bigger muscles, maybe it's stronger, maybe it's better sports performance. And so looking at those things, what's actually happening inside the body? Well, let's talk about that. The first thing we have to do is understand two principles. One is called the principle of adaptation. What is the principle of adaptation? It is the body's adjustment to training through repeated exposures, which improves performance. What adaptations are we talking about? Well, they can range to many things, but it goes from enzyme and nutrient density inside the tissues to changes in tissue like size, strength, muscular endurance, tissue extensibility. Those are some of the adaptations, but there are many more. If you want to look that up, you can find that on the internet as well. But there are many more, but those are some of the ones that we deal with directly in the gym. The other principle we need to consider is the principle of progressive overload. What is the principle of progressive overload? It is a training method that involves gradually increasing the stress we put on the body through workouts in order to cause your body to improve in strength and endurance or other fitness things that you may be after. So you may be asking yourself now, what can I do to achieve progressive overload? I hope that's what you're thinking, but if so, let's talk about it. We at Work Time like to use 5 variables of workout and training to achieve progressive overload. And those 5 are the weight that we use, the sets and the reps, the rest time, and the intensity. Let me demonstrate what those might look like. I may start here with just curling this bar, and I might curl the bar for 3 sets of 10. That's my sets, that's my reps. The bar weighs 45 pounds, that's my weight. And then I might rest in between each set 1 minute or 2 minutes. Okay. Now, I had a pretty steady pace and lift in that. That's what I'm gonna stick with the whole workout. The adjustments that we make. If I want to adjust the weight, maybe I'm working on my strength, and if I'm working on strength, I want to get stronger because maybe I've hit a plateau. By the way, plateaus are really good. When we hit a plateau, that means our body has achieved the principle of adaptation. We have adapted to the stresses we've put on our body through working out. Now we need to make one of these changes to continue to push the body into a new stress and adapt to the new stress. By adding weight, now I've changed one of those variables. And just lifting 3 sets of 10 with a 1 minute break or 2 minute break at a constant speed, that's going to get me somewhere. But once my body adapts to that, I have to change it. I've changed just one of the variables in changing the weight, and I'll do that. Maybe as well, if the weight isn't enough, or maybe that could be enough. You have to take it slow, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But the weight might be enough of a change to elicit a little bit more growth or a little bit more stress. Some of the other things that I can do, maybe 3 sets of 10 wasn't enough. I've adapted to 3 sets of 10. Maybe I'll add a set. Maybe I'll add reps. Maybe 10's not enough. Maybe I want 12. Maybe I want 15. Again, depending on my training goals, there are certain parameters that I'll want to work inside. However, I can change the sets and reps inside those parameters. Maybe I will take the rest time down a little bit. Instead of 2 minutes, I'll go to 1 minute. Or instead of 1 minute, I'll go down to 30 seconds. Not give my muscles much chance to rest, not allow the energy system that's providing my muscles energy to work out to completely recover and continue to pull on that and stress that a little bit. Those are also different fitness goals, but they're all some of the variables that we use in the principle of adaptation. Last but not least is the intensity. This one's a little bit hard for some folks to understand, but the intensity can really be simply put as the speed at which I do. So I'll demonstrate that one. Maybe I'm curling at this nice pace here, up and down, it's nice and equal. Maybe I'm going to change that in my intensity by speeding up my curl. Maybe I'm just going to speed up the contraction, and I'm going to let the eccentric contraction go slow. And maybe I'll speed that up again. So that's the intensity. I can change the intensity by using speed. That's the easiest way to understand that. You know, I'm a big believer in science, and I follow science and I research science. And if science, I have a saying that says, people lie, data doesn't. And so you have to know how to look at data and how to understand data if you want to dig into it as far as I do. But I found a study that I liked. And in this study, they studied 83 people and found that the principle of progressive overload effectively increased muscle size 2011 and strength study in both by Peterson and women. There's plenty out there. There are volume loading and muscular adaptation, and a lot of them say much of the same thing with small changes, but those studies are all out there and available for you to find if you're looking for some data to support this theory or these principles. Progressive overload and the principle of adaptation. Those are the two things that we were talking about this week of why we come to the gym, what we're doing when we come to the gym, and what's happening in our bodies when we come to the gym. Some things to keep in mind. If you're not familiar with this, I highly recommend you speak with a personal trainer or a gym trainer or someone who understands this if you really want to go into this. You can research it and understand it yourself as well, but be careful when you do it. Talk to professionals in the field when you're going to start implementing things like this into your workout routine. When doing progressive overload, you have to take it slow. I mentioned 5 variables that we adjust here at work time, but we don't always adjust all 5 variables. Very seldomly do we adjust more than one variable. It just depends on the individual and depends on the training and what it looks like. Sometimes I will, but as a professional, I will make that decision with our client or our gym patrons that are here working out on the floor. It's not just something you jump into. It has to happen slow. You have to allow the tissues time to recover and adapt to the stress before you start making changes in the variable or multiple variables. The other thing that I'd really like to talk about is that I don't just use this for the gym. It's very effective in the gym, but there's a rehabilitation aspect that goes to it. We do the same thing in rehab. Being a strength and conditioning coach as well as an athletic trainer, I like to mix the two fields. They play very well together. And what that means is when I am recovering somebody, working with somebody in a rehab program from an injury or just some soreness or something that's going on, poor ranges of motion, anything like that, any type of rehab, I use these two principles inside the rehab. What that looks like is when I have somebody, let's say, for instance, and Lord forbid, but let's say I break my arm. Now my arm's going to be in a cast. That cast is going to be on me for 6 to 8 weeks. And then as my bones heal, guess what I'm not doing? Extending and flexing my arm. Guess what those muscles are not doing? They're not working at all. Maybe I can flex them, maybe not. Sometimes that hurts, especially after a pretty serious break. After doing that, sitting in a cast for 6 to 8 weeks, you know what happens to these muscles that don't get worked? They atrophy, they get smaller, they get weaker, and they get less capable. You know what happens to that joint? It's not used to that full range of motion, and there is way less strength in that full range of motion because of all of that. When I start a rehabilitation program with either one of my gym patrons or an athlete or a veteran inside the clinic, what I would do in that kind of situation is we would start with our range of motion. Once we got our range of motion, and the principle of adaptation and progressive overload applies to that range of motion. If I can only move my arm this far, then I'm going to work inside this far, and I'm going to try and get a little bit more. And I'm going to put stress on the body because the body doesn't want to do it. It's not used to doing it. And eventually, the principle of adaptation will happen, and that progressive overload of going more and more and more. I'm only working with one variable, and it's that range of motion, and going more and more and more is going to provide me eventually a full range of motion. Now, once I get a full range of motion, now I want to develop strength through my full range of motion. This arm's going to be smaller than this arm because it's been in a cast for so long and the muscles have atrophied, they've gotten smaller. Also, I'm going to be looking to gain some muscle. Not my primary goal for rehab to bulk you back up to the other side, but to provide a strength increase that's pretty close to equal to this side. Usually in the rehabilitation field, we like to look at 85 to 90% of the strength of the other arm, the uninjured arm, and then we kind of let people go, or you might be familiar with physical therapy discharge or something of that sort, or the doctor cuts you loose to be able to go back to your gym and do things. So what I'd like to do is start with a small weight, and we go concentric muscle contraction and eccentric muscle contraction. We go both ways, and I want resistance both ways. I want resistance in the contraction, and I want resistance in the eccentric contraction, because I want my muscle to work both ways and be strong both ways. Again, those two principles, the principle of adaptation and the principle of progressive overload, those two principles will apply to the rehab in order for me to continually progress my rehab until I'm at a point that I can be released from my therapy or return to the gym and not hurt myself. All right, thank you for joining us. Stay tuned for our next cycle. I've got some more information coming your way.